I can sign in here, okay. If this works. Sending me a passcode. Come on, Zoom. There we go. Ta-da.
Good morning.
Good morning. Just trying to sign into Zoom. It signed me out for some reason. Make sure that I'm recording you. I am. How is everyone?
Yeah, brunching with mom.
Very good. And Brandel, you're still in the United Kingdom. It looks like your hotel behind you.
Yes, yep. Tomorrow is my last full day, and then we fly out on Wednesday. It's been fun. Went to the Barbican yesterday.
Barbican? That is the most
around.
American thing I've heard in my whole life. Barbican. Oh, I love you.
Do they still have the Royal Legend exhibit open?
I don't know. We just walked around the conservatory and a bunch of the sort of estates, looking at the shape of them and thinking about the kind of culture and music that's come from it. And also hung out with a friend who is the professor of journalism for City University, and asking her about what she thinks about data and journalism and space.
I absolutely love the Royal Legend exhibit when I was there doing a mini pupillage in law school, and the music was absolutely wonderful. Got a couple copies of the audio cassette tape for it, and they eventually died, and I wrote to the composer, and amazingly, he mailed me over a CD of the music, so I'd be able to enjoy it again.
Brilliant.
You Brits are the best.
That's really cool. By the way, before we move into anything less important, the most important, Mark, you as the only authorized Brit in the room, can you please tell Brandel how to pronounce it?
Barbican, but it's, well, no, I Brandon pronounced as I perfectly would expect an American mind. It's how you sound out syllables. The interesting thing about the Barbican actually is it's kind of weird because you've got this ode to 60s brutalist concrete structure right next door to Smithfield, which is, I guess, what you might describe as the meatpacking district. So very, very old bit right next to it. Well, that's London for you. But the goodness, I don't know, there's rather nice of the theatre in the round. There's rather nice little theatre in the round there. I remember seeing some rather good restoration comedy there that worked remarkably well in that sort of setting.
If I remember correctly, you know that movie with Gibson, You Cannot Take Our Freedom, all of that blue painted face and whatever. He was hung, drawn, and quartered at Smithfields, right between Smithfields and Barbican. So, yeah, all kinds of history. All kinds. Yeah. Just as a practical matter, I emailed Fabian Brandel and Mark the book, but of course I can send it to you too, Peter. It's just so you have the JSON stuff. You obviously do technical things too, so hang on.
Ah, very good. Oh, and after we finish brunch at the end of the hour, Mom's going to need me to take her out, so I'll have to bow out after the first hour.
And I'm going to have to leave after an hour and a half because I have to take my mother to the doctors.
How's she doing?
She's doing absolutely insanely well, considering she fell off a mountain. It's just, I looked at where she fell. 1 or 2 meters to the right, she would be dead. You know, there were enough trees and shrubbery to catch, but also if the neighbor
thank God.
was living in the middle of the night, picking up his daughter from a party she shouldn't have gone to, she would have frozen to death. So it's just...
Yikes.
Yeah, yikes indeed. I had a thought in the car I just want to throw out to everyone. In terms of moving forward for the next 2 months, we talked a little bit last time about personal knowledge management, and we've also talked about our own record, i.e. the book. I really think that we should consider focusing our talks on those two things. Number one, how can we make the book more readable in VR particularly? And how can people's interactions with the book contribute to their own personal knowledge management? Hi, Jim. Sorry, Jim. I was just throwing out a proposal. Just give the sentence again. Okay, now you can hear me even, Jim. Okay. So just really briefly, I was just throwing out a proposal of two things we might want to consider over the next few months. Number one, how can we make our record, in other words, the book, usefully readable in VR particularly? And secondly, how can we help users take what they learn into their personal knowledge management systems? And I see Fabien's got his hand up already.
Yes, hello. So I did a quick demo 6 months or 1 year ago where I organized documents like covers of PDF and then send it to a ebook reader. And so this is what I would recommend. Not that demo specifically, but not making people read in VR, discovering and organizing toward another medium that is more appropriate for that. Because I think even reading 600 pages in a paper book is challenging. Reading more than one page in VR also is. So I would focus on something that, indeed, as you said, the second question, links toward their personal management system, being an ebook reader or pretty much anything else but VR.
I completely agree with you. VR is great for stuff. It's not great for digestion necessarily. I think that very soon it will be, when certain physical issues get improved upon. But I agree that VR should be the organizing and learning, as in scene connection space. Mark, you're the hand after me.
Yes, I just quickly say it's rather catching up on a reply I made to Fred separately, rather on the subject. Is one of the questions to ask ourselves is, okay, well, what is the minimum that the enhanced aspect of the book? So I take and agree Fabien's point, but if we want to do something in VR, right, rather than read it in sort of a long form section, but if we want to look at the interrelation of the authors, or we want to look at the subject matters, what information do we need to acquire which we don't already have in order to make that work? In other words, what don't we get for free by people sending us an article?
Yeah, Peter.
I think it might be nice to have like a little speaker icon next to labels, so you could click on the speaker icon and then have the entry read as opposed to reading it as text in VR. So you should be able to get the audio of the entry. The other thing might be nice would be to have a notion of taking things like we have in interactive fiction, so that if I want, I could take a definition and then that would automatically get stuck in a little bag of things that I collected that could be exported into my personal knowledge environment afterwards.
Yeah, good point, especially the audio. So, hello, Alan. That's funny. I just saw on Twitter your face was like, where is he? There he is, which is excellent. We just threw out a little suggestion here for what we maybe want to focusing on the next few months. I can't remember if you heard about this. I'm sure you did. But Fabien suggested that in about 6 months, we meet to do demos. So we'll have a mini future of text, but it'll all be about some sort of a demo. Slick demo, rough demo, doesn't matter. So with an eye to that and, where to put the conversation, what we're talking about now is the idea of helping you deal with the book, the knowledge of the book in VR, not necessarily read, as has just been pointed out, and also how the knowledge in the book can be integrated into, oh, great, here's Bob, so I'll do it again. Hi, Bob. Just to tell you where we're at, Bob, under the suggestion Fabien had that in about 6 months, we meet again to do a kind of a symposium that's all about demos, rough demos, smooth demos, doesn't matter, but some kind of demo. The idea is that we focus on two things for our conversation moving forward. One of them is how to make the book, our content, digestible in VR, not necessarily readable, but so you can see how things connect and so on. That's half. The other half, how can we help the reader integrate what they learn in this environment into their/a personal knowledge management system? Now, there was a question, a kind of a reference earlier, which is going to cause me to share screen and show you the current state of the book, which I sent to you, but I'm going to make you small. All right, you can all see the screen, obviously, right? So here is the intellectual problem. Here's Barbara Tversky. Whether she's going to be in here or not or in this form is a secondary thing to discuss, but this is the discussion we had with her in January. So it's under here as journal guest presentation : Mind in Motion. So what I've done is from her slides, if it's what she speaks, I have put it in this form. I haven't included the slide, I've included the images. So there's quite a few of things like this, which is quite nice. So this is very much Bob and Jim trying to graphically lay it out. And if I can take it from her, so that's good. But the reason I'm showing it to you is that what I have learned really going through her work today, and also going through both Jaron, which is just normal bolds, and then finally Ken, where is he? There's extremely little overlap. So in terms of, if we only think about these three pieces of work, Barbara, Ken, and Jaron, what in the world would we want to see in a kind of a virtual environment? It's actually a really good case study. You know, it's easy to think of connections and people and keywords and all of that, but they don't have any keyword overlaps, really. Even though they're kind of talking about the same thing. So how do we deal with that? I'll mute myself and have some coffee.
I can venture, I could take a first stab, I guess, because that is a good example in the sense that it's very specific too. So I think it's a good place to get started. Two trajectories. One is either with just those three or with the entire corpus, stuff it into GPT-3, get progressive summarization at different levels of summarization. And then from those, you know, ranging from highly compressed to more broad, seeing what comes out of that. And it could be that at the highly compressed version, there is an actual natural trickle down where even though none of the keywords were specifically said, once it's summarized, it's, oh, we're talking about embodied cognition. Virtual reality is a kind of embodied cognition. The belief being that with motion, you can comprehend more and perhaps interact more, right? It'd be interesting to see if GPT did that, but then the other trajectory is doing something like that ourselves, like a list of, you know, 95 theses or something. These are the principles that are referred to or explicitly stated throughout this book. These are the principles that underlie it. And so by connecting principles 1 and 46, you can see this is what Jaron's talking about.
Yeah, Fabian.
So I have a little problem with GPT-3, being that I don't know what's going on. I know It kind of works in some situations, but in terms of inspectability, it's problematic for me, and it's kind of open and not really. So I think this kind of process is definitely interesting, but I would start with something much more basic, like n-grams or also TF-IDF or like something that are simpler, doesn't sound as sexy as the latest model, but might still give something interesting, just finding like rare words, for example, something like this. And eventually, or if somebody can do it, sure, going for it. But the problem of backtracking how something happened or surfaced is problematic. So I think starting with something that might not sound as sexy because it's not as new, but at least not some of us can understand some of what is going on.
in defense of that for a moment, I'm not advocating for GPT-3 at all, or I mean, that was the example, isn't just like it's a thing to try. I actually think that this would be a good fit because there is a scope, there is a limit to the corpus, right? It's more dangerous when it's like, take all of the news articles that happened last year, run it through GPT-3 and see what it has to say, right? And I'm not so much talking about GPT-3 as the value of large language models, which in its infancy, and totally agree that don't know what's going on, not a thing to rely on. But in the large language model sense, you get an advantage that you don't get from Ngrams because you have access to, it's almost like it's jumped at an obnoxious scale. So you get more of a sense of different ways to understand the words than you would get from an Ngram. Ngrams, you can still get caught in those little silos of verbiage and not connect the dots to another leap. But that's mincing words. The idea is either like kind of essentially we do it ourselves, or we try out some of these naughty automated services and see what they come up with. And I'm sure there's plenty of other ideas. I just thought I'd get the ball rolling with those two.
I might take volume 1 into author as well, which means we would have the structure and JSON and Visual Meta and all of that. But the thing that really surprised me about doing the editing, and I've been here with my mother, so it's been a bit dramatic, but I've been working so many hours, zoomed in, completely focused. It's been fantastic, maybe as a relief, I don't know. But I've been doing a ton of editing, the stuff that Mark Anderson usually has to, because my brain can't do it. And I have learned so much more, like Jaren's speech. When I kind of, let me just show you. When I read it, it's so much more intelligible. It's actually quite shocking. Like, you know, here he says, I'm going to go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, right? So we do that, and then we start. And it turns out he only gets to 2 of them, and then we have a lot of dialogue. But if you then look at Ken's, you know, there's a bit of that stuff. And finally, as I showed you with Barbara, so many things here. You know, I'm a graphic designer by history, so the stuff that Jim has been talking about is very, very dear to my heart. So that was one thing I really wanted to highlight, that yes, it's great to have a live conference because you listen because the person is there, so you can ask a question. But deeper digestion, good old-fashioned text is just better. You know, and I think that's something to really hold on to. Now, jumping from one piece to what should I now read next, I'm completely on the side of, you know, we need to zoom out, we need to do the kind of things you talked about, Alan. But it was really kind of shocking that, you know, we talked about this for hundreds of years. A few bullet points really helps. You know, not burying text in the middle. But still, there's so few concepts that overlap. So we may just have to do a lot of human curating where we say, you know, Jaren is the VR grandfather. Barbara is about the mind in motion. You know, we do a couple of specific plain old writings, but then we just present it in a really coherent form. Because before I give the mic back, so to speak, if we look at our table of contents, you know, this is not very good. This is probably the thing we can improve most usefully. You know what I mean? This could be much more vibrant in a dynamic environment. Yeah, next, Mark, I think.
Yes, I mean, I'm rather accord with Fabian's point about sort of, you know, black box like GPT-3, but I think the interesting thing is, as Alan, it's a juxtaposition of the two. So using something that's state of the art, whether it's, you know, to our mind slightly from the dark side, is not the full issue. It's that, because one interesting thing, for instance, is if for sake of argument, GPT-3 was provided traction that we didn't get by other methods, that's an interesting and a worry bead, because that means someone's already sort of got regime capture on the good stuff. So it's probably an interesting exercise that just arises from the necessary analysis we've got to do, and that the two sort of aren't different. And I must say, on the point of GPT-3, I was actually quite surprised that I now learned there is a thing called being a prompt engineer. Though it rather fills me with acute sorrow. As Dave Millard, who's my supervisor in Frade, sort of said right, so for years and years and years, we worked with all this mechanization, to take it out of the hands of the cult priests. And what have we done now? We've got people dreaming up trigrams to stick into a magic black box to try and get success. I'm not sure if it feels like progress at the moment, but that's perhaps a slightly negative view.
Agreed. And the prompt engineering is a topic unto itself, which I also have a complicated relationship with. I wanted to mention something that I think is maybe even where the progressive summarization idea came from, because it's an underlying theme, but you reminded me of it, Fro, when you were talking about how you had this occasion to actually like do deep work, and it's wonderful. I think the angle that I'm coming from primarily when I think about volume 3, volume 2, 1, etc., is the natural desire for fidelity versus the natural state of a typical reader. And I am interested in I have an assumption that could be wrong, but I have an assumption that the typical reader does not have time or focus to just like assume a whole new piece of work. And the best thing that we could do in this kind of diaphanous format is create layers of summarization, easier ways to jump in. And that also creates a very interesting kind of interface. I'm looking right in front of me at Otter of a previous conversation that I've had. And over to the right, Otter has created an outline automatically of what it thinks the topics are from point to point. And in that case, it doesn't even matter whether it's right. What matters is that it's attempted to make some kind of anchor for me. And sure enough, even though like I don't know that, one of the outline points is there's not a right way to do it. Okay, that doesn't hold any meaningful content, but it still helps me anchor because I was there, right? And I can kind of figure out what we were talking about encased in these two other points. So that's the broader direction that I'm interested in. It may be, a faulty assumption, but I just figure I should be upfront about that.
I think that's absolutely perfect, because we're talking view specs is one of Doug Englebart's big ideas. And what you're talking about is a really fancy view spec. So I absolutely 100% behind that. Now, when it comes to the integration with a potential knowledge management or PKM or whatever, either existing or that we theoretically or physically create, is the question of how to cite something. So that goes into addressing and all kinds of issues. And one thing that I have learned in my older years is that if you just put something in a bucket, as Mark has said many times, it stays in a bucket. If there is a really pleasant way, like when you organize your photo album from a party or your stamp collection or whatever, if there's a very pleasant way to assign some kind of context plus automatic context, it makes it much easier to find it. Going through Barbara Tversky's stuff, let's say we are interested in her diagramming because we've also read about that in Bob's work. These are very specific ways of, we probably want to somehow lift that, assign that as in diagramming insights and put that away, right? But, there's so many competing ways to do that in the world. And it seems to me that it will be solved. Maybe we can solve it. I'm just being, having spent so much time with so many of you last week, online and offline, there's a lot of good stuff here. How should we do that?
I'd like to go back and just get the name of the software that Alan was talking about, because I heard Otter, O-T-T-E-R. Is that what it was?
Yeah, I'll put it in chat.
It is.
Otter.ai. Oh, Alan, Bob doesn't read chat. So otter.ai.
Thank you.
I presume because it does it automatically.
Oh my God, really? I actually didn't know that. That makes sense. I thought it was just a cute animal.
But it seems to me something that one would want to build on. You know, that would help this conversation if we had an outline that was happening, you know, visibly. And then when that would ask the question, well, then could it be better in virtual reality? I mean, that's one question one could ask. Another question is, how could we, if it's an imperfect outline, how imperfect is it? Is it 80%? Is it 50%? I don't know. You know, haven't never seen it. Maybe you know, and we would build on that, because you can build on those kind of structures if you know, if they're up around 80%, you can build on them.
So this is what I use for us. I use hang on, I have to move the big panel here. It's called Sonics, and it's actually amazing. You know, this happens to be one of our general meeting, but just have a look at this. Right, it's, I would say it's 95% accurate.
That's a transcription. That's transcription, right?
Yeah, but that's what Otter does too.
Outlining. Is that, am I understanding what difference you're calling our attention to?
But well, Otter is also basically transcription, right?
Yeah, I can share my screen if it'll help.
But you say yeah, okay, yeah, do that, please.
It is transcription. It's not like anything fancy. It's really just
You mentioned summary.
it does a
as well.
remarkably good job of it. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
You mentioned summary as a function as well, I think is what Bob is curious
right.
about. Is that?
That's right. So you can see here, this is the particular conversation going on.
Mhm.
And then here's an outline. It's a beta product that they've, you know, put out where they say, like, I think this is what they're talking about from paragraph to paragraph. But what's interesting is that, I mean, it does a pretty good job of recognizing, say, Solid is a rather new framework, right? And it's an odd thing to say in a sentence because it already has so many other meanings. But it's smart enough to recognize Solid, capitalize it as a proper noun, you know, as a noun, and then deploy in 6K per page was, in fact, I mean, that's a rather coded domain specific kind of term, that whole sentence, and it did a good job there. Could be because it's tech industry, you know. So yeah, it's pretty good, right?
I would call that transcription and summarize and well, maybe a summarizer, but not an outliner. I mean, even though they call it an outliner.
Well, yeah,
It doesn't have the structure, any structure of an outline that I can see.
And yeah, not getting literal with this at all. The only value of this, and the only reason I brought it up, is that my point is that even bad markers can be helpful indicators.
Yes.
Even if you have a road sign that tells you the wrong name of the road, you could still be like, that road sign with the wrong road name is where I need to turn left, right?
Yeah, I agree. You know, and a transcriber summarizer is the first step for an outliner. How do we build on that? How do we, you know, how does one structure then the conversation that's happening? Because an outline is going to put similar things together, so to speak, different things in different places, and
yeah, well, right,
and maybe hierarchicalize them. I can't say the word them in some sort of fashion. That would be the next step to
yeah,
try to achieve what we're trying
I mean,
to achieve.
this is a bit of a rabbit hole but it's something that's very interesting. I feel very much sympathy for the designers and developers of these kinds of products, right? Because I'm sure that they want an outliner, but they have to be like, well, our our version of trying to summarize these is only going to be like 30% success rate to begin with. So
Mhm.
to double down and outline on top of that is going to, limit the success even further. I'm assuming that what they'll be doing is once they get a better gist of the conversation as what they're going for, then they will allow the user to create their outlines from there, perhaps a step before automatically creating outlines. Anyway, it's an interesting way of doing product. And it's coming from,
I also have a great sympathy for people who are trying to do that, because
yeah,
I've been trying to do that all my life.
Hmm.
And
So that-
it's hard. It's really hard. So that's why I jumped on your description of this, because I thought, oh boy, there's a breakthrough. Wow, wonderful. And it's hard, and I realized that even if it's 80%, the last 20% is really hard.
Yeah.
If you got, and in fact, I'll say if you've got 80%, the last 40% is still hard.
yeah, exactly.
So this is how it's been approached in the book so far, and it is just editorially, instead of just having reams of text, doing bullets and headings as much as possible from speech. So it's obviously a manual thing, but it's easier to read than this, right?
Yep. Thank you. That's great.
Yeah, looks good.
As the 19th century in this group, the 19th century representative, I confess that I'm taking handwritten notes. And relative to your point, Alan, I'd say my handwritten notes are probably 30% successful, but they're still useful to me because they are a trigger which activates my memory
Yes.
that I couldn't
yes.
otherwise do. So when you're
Yes.
talking about a transcriber being 60 or 70% accurate, I basically want a copy of what you're using or what Frodo's using, because that's much more useful than what I'm doing.
I mean, it's much more, I would say it's way over 90%, but on this transcription kind of aspect, one of the things that also stood out working in depth at the book over the last few days is the monthly presentations we have are 2 hours long, rather than 10 minutes plus 10-minute dialogue. There's so much more meat there. I don't mind editing those. I don't mind spending, it literally takes a full day, as Mark knows, he's been doing it too. So I'm wondering, what is the appetite in the group for really prioritizing having monthly guest presentations from these amazing people, properly transcribing them, and properly marking them up, and really building the journal so that every year we have the symposium, plus we really prioritize the journal articles as part of that volume.
Yeah, I mean that sounds good. I'd be happy to watch and participate in those. It would be a nice function. Back to the question of the summary and what's good in VR and all of those kinds of things. I think an inevitable sort of confrontation that has to happen is like, what for? What do you want to get out of it? And one of the things that would be useful for me would be prompts for what it is, what is my response, and how can I encode that, as well as having information about the thing itself. Being sort of relatively substantially egocentric, I'm able to sort of comprehend many things and go like, what does this mean for me? What does this make me want to think about? What does this make me want to do? But yeah, like the function of a summary of the symposium, the function of a summary of the other stuff, is it to seek further study, like just to seek further subjects to go into? Is it to reflect personally, or is it to compare and be able to make those connections? One of the things that was really funny about going to the Natural History Museum is the way that in the main hall, where there's the big whale skeleton, there are little chambers off to the side, immediately off to the side, and they cover the major bases of like seaweed and marsupials and other things. And it was really interesting to see the way in which, obviously this is a wonderful monument to natural history and everything like that, but you know, all of the captions on them were like, here's some seaweed, it's real cool, we've got just so much seaweed, you guys, and if you're interested, then come hit us up. And it became very clear in so many words, you know, obviously they use different language there, but it made it really clear that these were homepages, these were landing pages for people whose special interests may include seaweed or marsupials or other small land mammals and stuff like that. And the way that they were, yeah, like these home pages. If this was a website, then those were those things to say, like, here's a thing, it's pretty interesting. If you're into, if you're not into it, then that's fine. But if you are into it, then you know, if this is something that you're going to latch onto, then here is the information about it that should make it that much more appealing. And I was just really struck by that. As an advertisement that was kind of nestled in these things, as like, if this tickles your fancy and you can make it your life's work, then here's where to come to it. And yeah, just that sort of implicit call to action was really pleasing to take note of.
Love it. A couple of quick thoughts on that, and I do actually the summarization and Jim, what you mentioned about the personal notes and how it means things to you. That is a different topic I want to dive into, because it actually kind of like gets close to what I was hoping to get to towards in the symposium. But directly to the natural history example, which is such a great example, it reminds me of a couple of things. First, I'll say that figuring out how this works in VR, I think, is an arbitrary constraint that we put on ourselves. Knowing in the background that it is moving towards VR, and that we're all sympathetic to VR, AR, etc., is, I think, in a lot of times in a lot of the conversations we have, good enough to move things. But it sometimes is an unnecessary stressor to say, we have this PDF. Now, how's it going to work in VR, right? So just putting that out there, and that I believe that AR, VR is the necessary propellant to change interface patterns, and I'm excited about it. Okay. That said, an example I came across that was very intriguing to me is Ray Dalio's book Principles, and his newer book, How the World Change the World Order. The book itself is clearly thought out. He's clearly put a lot of passion into it, because you have several ways to navigate it with very big print or fine colors to help you sense, oh, this is a principle, or this is a thing I can skim over, this is a personal detail. So that's interesting. Where it gets really interesting is that he also created an app called Principles in Action. And in this app, you can really get the entire content of the book for free, as well as YouTube videos that he's made and animations that are high quality. And you also get to choose a kind of method of interaction if you want. If you want to get a principle of the day, you can, right? You can learn how to, if you like really buy into it, love this stuff, you can have it become part of your everyday life. I mention that because it's such an excellent way of saying, here's the first artifact, the book. Now we're going to unfold it in these various ways. Animation for YouTube, application here for someone who wants a part of their daily life. And I think there's a great opportunity for Future of Text that way, right? Because personally, if I hear a little bit of Barbara Tversky, I'm not going to necessarily go on and read the rest of her article in Future of Text. I'm going to go straight to the source. I'm going to read her book, right? I want that context. And then maybe afterwards I'll go and skim the article or the talk, right? But I want a thing to point me to, you know, this is a person who's thought deeply about all of this. Here's where to find her thoughts, or here are her top level thoughts. And being able to get something like that in the form of an app is kind of compelling. Even if just 3 people downloaded it, would be kind of interesting. So that's the idea from the whale and the home pages, because I totally agree. It's a great way to do a museum.
Yeah, I obviously have to jump in on that very positively. First of all, my definition of VR is very simple. It just means without visual limitations. That's all it means. So, you know, it's just, could be anything. Also, when you talk about app and all this stuff, in the case of Barbara, I'm glad you happened to mention her, because two things happened. Number one, as I've shown you guys a few times now, but it's for a reason. So where is she? You know, I've actually bothered really lay it out readably. You know, this is so readable. You know, she spoke all of this stuff with slides, right? And then secondly, there's this. I just got an email a few minutes ago. Inspired by last week, I began writing a new piece, right?
Oh, wonderful.
So the reason, yeah, thank you. I'm very happy about that too. But the reason I'm highlighting that is I feel a little bit emboldened, to be honest with you guys, after last week. We have a great community. We have great dialogue. So I feel more emboldened to be a stronger editor, in both in what we take and what we don't take, but also how we show it. You know, I was really worried about doing the bolding a few months ago, and that got good response. You know, if you guys read something that has been bolded and you think it's the wrong bolding, you just tell me and I'll change it, right? That's the community we have. We have to make actions, but we can also change them. So when you're talking about different ways to present it, first of all, I do think that people, if they come across Barbara in this work, they would read this just because it's shorter before reading her books.
Sure.
But I do also think that citations and addressing is so crucial to this kind of stuff that whenever she talks about some stuff, we should somehow make it possible to find out the shortest connection to her previous work on some stuff. Right? She's not going to cite page 83 on her book necessarily. But if we could somehow do that, when you're reading a sentence in our work, to instantly go back into her work, I think your provocation there is useful. I tried to do, you know, like with the images you had, you know, making sure it's the right citation and all of that stuff. But I think your thought about how does that person go into that person's previous work is incredibly valuable, because then we become kind of the DJs of this. We become the curators.
Right. And it's stuff that, like, I think a lot of people are interested in, but there is a way more powerful and visible barrier than we like to recognize. And it can be in the form as simple as, oh, this book is this big and I have this much free time. And I wind up reading huge books in ebook form and not realizing it until I see the physical book that I actually poured through something that I never would have picked up in the bookstore because it was like that, right? It's a weird cognitive bias or hack or blind spot. And it would be wild to use Future of Text as an organ to get people past those things and make it more accessible, make Tversky more accessible. And
I think that's very, very interesting. And I see Mark has his hand up, but
yeah, sorry.
I just want to make sure we have agreed that the monthly presentations we're really going to value, right? That's a lot of notes for that. Good. So we'll have to, all of us, suggest who to interview. I've asked Jaron if he wants to come back and complete his presentation, because there was a few things he didn't talk about. Also, the annual symposium next year is going to be 5-minute presentations, which is what it used to be, because we should know about your work already. It should be the dialogue afterwards, because what really marred the previous one was, you know, with the lack of communication, some people talked way over their 10 minutes. And there was a question of when are you going to stop? And it became a bit messy. So if you have something long to say, you come for our monthly presentation. That means we have some content. So that means that one of the things we probably have to do, as you've said many times, a long time ago, Alan, probably need a podcast. Can't be that hard to organize. You know, maybe we do build an app, but we also need to look at the framework for this. So I'm just very happy with this dialogue. Mark, sorry for going in.
No, it was simply that while you're talking about Barbara Tversky, as you put all the extra work into it, I'm just interested to see how effectively the boldings you put in collapse down, because now we've in a sense got a well-worked example, and we can just see how that looks. I mean, maybe that's something one shouldn't seek to do, and the highlighting is just there as a prompt. But I was just wondering what it looked like and what we take from that.
Yes, more importantly, though, Randall, where'd you get that cool jacket? It's being discussed.
I got it Peter's gonna like it. I got it from a place called Cyberdog.
Wow.
Nice.
Doesn't Apple own that name?
I think maybe it abandoned it some couple of decades ago, but I think having stuff actually labeled Cyberdog. Yes, it's a store in London. It's going to be pretty entertaining and provocative where I work. So.
We used to have a CyberDog pen. Do you remember those? They had the little paw prints on the pen body and the cord wrapped around it so that you could hang it over your neck, and eventually it ran out of ink.
Okay. Yeah, so Mark, you brought up a really important point, and that is does this particular view spec warrant an edit where everything else is removed? I think we need to get to a point where we can start trying these things. You know, there's so many different ways to do it, but at a certain point, you really need to be able to read Jaron's thoughts properly. They're so much deeper than I realized when I saw it. And of course, Fabienne is completely right. Chances are you might not want to read that in VR or whatever, but you need that space. By the way, the layout of the book is very intentional. Everything about the book is intentional to be read as a 2-page spread, but that's only the book fighting for itself, digital 2-page spread. You know, if somebody takes it upon themselves to have a VR version of the book, you know, you fight for what that will be. And hopefully the same underlying stuff will work in both environments, right? I mean, also, in terms of the people presented, there are some categories. There are artists, implementers, theory/academics. There are some things. So I'm wondering if we should make that even more explicit. For instance, we used to have guest presenter plus demo. You know, we made the demo ones quite specific, product demo. Maybe what we need to do now is have a more technical implementation track. Maybe Fabienne, you would like to head that, because you seem very much in that mode on how to teach people how to do that. I can, before you even nod your head or not, I can imagine that was easy. Can imagine someone reading a Ken Perlin, getting inspired by something there. And then, you know, how do I do it? And in this orbit, there is a how do I do it?
That's it's interesting. It's something I think about a lot, and I think even in the few examples I brought up, it becomes complicated, as we're all aware, right? Like, at what point is Ken talking about affordances and possibilities versus history versus creation? I mean, he touched on all of those, right? Versus Jaron's, who is, you know, again, much deeper into history, but he wasn't presenting anything that he built. So his was more speculative, right?
Yeah.
So what are the actual cornerstones or boundaries that you'll use to bounce these articles, the content of the articles off of each other, right? Like, I'm imagining a radar map or something, and this one has these components. It's such an interesting, simple and timeless problem that we always seem to fail at. So maybe just the simple categories are the best. But if there is interest in like novel categorizations, it would be pretty interesting to see like an appendix of metaphors that have been used, you know, and then that isn't quite accurate either, because it's still just, if there's a goal for any of this, it should be how to summarize and how to like bring this massive amount of content under some sort of gestalt understanding.
Yeah, there is a huge yes but here, and the yes but is, it is large, but it's not beyond human scale, right? So for instance, this is looking at what you're talking about now and what Mark talked about, right? So this is Jaron. If you only look at the bolts, you really should have a pretty good clue what's going on, right?
I love it.
So thank you. The magical thing about, okay, so one thing that I wanted to do with author, I saw somewhere that italic is highlight in sentence, bold is highlight on the page, which was really, really fascinating. So of course you can do bolding in different ways. It could be color, it doesn't have to be big and black, right? But it means skimmable. But to actually have the full text with bold does the obviously magical thing of, if you read, so what does this program actually do? You can keep reading, it's right there. You don't have to do anything to get the further stuff. Right, so if we just within our community, look at these types of things, and of course, there can be GPTs and all kinds of good stuff, but then we also work together on this stuff, the glossary, because currently the glossary here is really simple, right? But it allows you to go around and and look at a few things. And if we manage to have a mechanism where we can do that together, right? And also, I would really like to have competing glossaries. For instance, Bob Horn's murals are very specific Bob Horn advanced murals. They're not the same as the side of a Roman villa. But let's say there was an historian here and they wanted to talk about that kind of mural. It's absolutely fine. We just have to make sure it's really clear for the reader whose glossary entry they are dealing with. Currently, the glossary is all mine, because it was designed that way. But can we make a community glossary?
Yeah, it would be really funny, a future where someone could get Heglin's Future of Text versus Laidlaw's Future of Text. Same content, completely different emphasis,
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. I mean, I would, because the .liquid format is basically JSON with a bit of RTF and stuff, right? I wouldn't mind if we had, one person puts everything in, so Mark and I work on that together, so it's only one. That's fine. But once it's there in the basic form, to do different, we talked about bindings before. How many things are we looking at in one space, one volume? But also, what is the view spec? It will be, I would love to be able to have on the first page, this book is edited by so-and-so. These people have chosen to have their own versions of it. Tap here and the book reformats itself to be Alan's. It's really, really valuable because that can work in VR, in PDF, and whatever, right? It'll just.
It reminds me of Euclid, and then Burns Euclid, and then another derivation off of Burns Euclid, which is the website where the person made SVGs of Burns Euclid, and they're all building on the same ideas, but they're beautiful reinterpretations. On the topic of bold, I'll be right back to show you something. Go ahead.
I don't know what you were talking about there, Burns Euclid.
Me neither, but I'm stupid enough just to nod along. I'm not clever enough.
I can explain some if you want.
If it's important, that's what one would try to follow up on.
I felt it was just referring to 3 different versions of something, but yes, it would be nice to know the specifics.
I can explain a little bit. So Euclid is a geometer, somebody who came up with and was one of the first best sort of enunciations of geometric relationships. So visual Pythagoras and stuff. And Oliver Byrne did a good visual version of of the Euclid stuff. Yeah.
Oh, Mark.
That's why it's such a good. What? Did Mark already have it?
Yeah, we both pulled it out at the same time.
That's not the sort of movie we're making.
On the note about bold, though, just to give a quick tour of this, because I think Dalio is actually very sensitive to design, as you can see in pages that are like just fully, a simple concept. He starts with a good breakdown of sections and bold throughout, but then he'll also have sections that have red text that indicate, hey, this is a principle, right? This is a principle to focus on. And then what you see is in later areas, full, huge principles take up the center space, which is a nice kind of like intermission, if you will. And then he goes into greater detail for each one with sometimes an image attached, but and then graphs, and you can refer to these throughout the book, right? And it's a great way to anchor and it's kind of like activate your mind in a different way while reading it. So it's something to look at.
The one thing I think we discussed on Friday was related to that, and was the idea of pull-out quotes or whatever they're called. When you read a magazine, sometimes there's a large bit of text that's also in the smaller text, but it's a pull-out quote. So one thing that hopefully we can do is to encourage our contributors to tell us what they want to have featured big. You know, like, this is the screaming big thing that I'm talking about. That would be really wonderful.
Yeah, I even think a section near the front that could be like of just, here are the most important or most loved, whatever, paragraphs or sentence from each of these talks. So you could very quickly get a sense of the brilliant insights that are in store for you if you continue reading.
So that's a nice one. You could have what the writer thought was most interesting, and then what the readers thought was most interesting, of course, which may not align.
Right.
Quickly, Bob, I sent you an email of the website that relates to the book that Alan just showed.
Oh, thank you.
It's somebody's it's a wonderful bit of work that they've just
It's
did.
beautiful.
It's beautiful as this book is indeed.
Yeah.
You mean principles?
No, sorry,
no.
This one, the Burns Euclid.
Okay.
So this was done, I think, back in the 1800s, if I recall. Alan may know. Anyway, so this is a recent facsimile reprint, essentially, of and it's Taschen, Taschem, German publisher who does lots of high-end art books.
Did you add a link to the guy who made the site?
I put it in the website. I put it in the sidebar.
Okay, great.
It's c82.net/Euclid.
Yes.
So in a sense, Dalio's book is patterned after that. I'm guessing.
I wasn't making that relation, but Dalio's book definitely has a strong graphic design aesthetic. Like he clearly doesn't care about trying to look stuffy. He's like, let's make this comprehensible to the general audience, which I admire.
Also, Alan, I have most of his books also partially read, but the formatting is very helpful.
Yeah, it's funny because I find I want to feel like his observations are more stunning than they are. Like I want to be in favor. Like he's got a huge heart and he's saying this. He's clearly put a lot of himself into it. But then I start reading and I'm kind of like, oh man, this is boring. Anyway, Fabian, sorry, you had the hand up for a while.
Yeah, no worries. No, I'm thinking also if we take the throat bolding of a text, why should it be only him? Shouldn't all of us, if we want and if we can, do it so? And that either we have, let's say, that we have the sum of all those bolding that might overlap, might not, or pick a specific person and say, I want to see the bolding from that specific person. And if we were to have one, let's say, source document, let's say the book, and have then sharing to a centralized place all the different highlighting, then it could be also a way to have those different perspectives.
Totally.
I think it makes sense to do that, except for bullet pointing and that kind of level formatting, because then it's probably editorial consistency of how that is done. But that's just another layer. Yes, it would be absolutely good if we can choose whose highlighting we see, because that could go towards what we just talked about, different kind of editions.
If it were a thing we were all going to do, like if that was like agreed on, several conversations away from that, but if it were that was set, then it would be very interesting to first off, I guess, format the PDF so that there's more white space onto the right side or on the leaf, and then in areas where there are highlights or bold, you would see like a color dot off outside of the actual text, indicating which one of us bolded that. And so you could see some that would have like 6 colors and some that would have 2. And then in an interactive format, you could like click on one of those dots and see, oh, these are all the things that this color has found interesting. Anyway, simple web navigation there.
Let me mention a cautionary view. I am one of the world's most voluminous underliners and highlighters. I get in a rhythm and I highlight about 5 times as much as I should.
Same.
So there are arguments against collective highlighting as well.
100% agree. I when I read Kindle books and I see the things that like the public has outlined many times, it's humorous to me because I think how I must be screwing up their experience because I'm like essentially highlighting the whole book.
That's okay.
Bob good-naturedly has seen some of the books I've underlined and he smiles politely.
Yeah, but there are different kinds of underlines too. And if we have this thing of who underline, we can choose who to see. But some of it, you know, on a paper book, because I love destroying my paper books. It's how I own them, you know, destroy, I mean, in a fun way. If it's something, you know, underlined, but if it's really important, I circle it like crazy. If it's a whole paragraph, I do things, you know, we all have our visual styles for that. But if there is a highlight you want to share with someone else, you may want to use a different pencil. Right, it's a
Right.
different, but it's also changing, you know, we have our hands, we can do so much with Smoothly. So we can change how we do something. That's one thing. But I've noticed, especially with games, if you have to press a different button for a different function, that is actually a huge cognitive load. Right? I'm highlighting to make this more special. I press the pen harder. That's okay. I'm highlighting to make this special. I choose a different pen. That's actually a ton of work because your main effort is on the reading bits.
Yes.
So how we can actually somehow capture the different intents of that might be that might be something that an AR VR environment actually can help with because maybe you can see more of what we're doing. Sorry, yeah, Peter.
Yeah, back as an undergrad, I went through a highlighting phase and I was using 3 different color highlighters with little vertical stripes in the side margin to indicate things, and then started bleeding through the pages. And by the end of the course, I realized I'd rendered the text totally unreadable. And I finally gave up on that and went just to leaving the text completely clean and taking Cornell style notes on a separate piece of paper. I should also note that I'm breaking out the section from my symposium talk on the Benedictine cyberspaces, and I'm expanding that into a separate discussion, which is already at 1,300 words and growing. So we'll sort of separate that from the main talk that I actually gave. And it's time for me to head out with Mom now. So I'll see you guys on Friday.
Yep.
Hey, Peter.
Bye,
That's a
Peter.
great point about highlighting. It reminds me of sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Mark.
Well, I just a quick thing. I mean, I'm actually fun enough like Peter. I mean, it took me a while to realize, although I was never encouraged to scribble on books when I was young, but actually I've realized that I don't highlight now because it just creates cognitive load for me. I can't read something that's been scribbled on, whether I did or somebody else. But I say that, but I'm mindful that, you know, it doesn't bother me if other people highlight in a different way. And one of the things that got us to where we are with author and sort of settling on the bolding was that Fred and I had some full and frank conversations along the way because, well, we have a different approach to highlighting. And I thought, well, if the thing ends up, you know, with all sorts of stuff all over it, in fact, the bolding, I think, works quite well. And there's also, I think, the gray highlighting he did. So the point being that it's useful to be able to show things of relevance without making it too intrusive on the reading experience. We can go and do all sorts of other fancy stuff in other view specs with effectively the metadata that creates. But in terms of the reading experience, I think that having as little markup at first point is useful. So I like the idea. You say, okay, here are the markups, and you might put a color prompt off to the side, but you probably do the highlight in the same color. Because although it sounds fancy, you can say, oh, let's see the blue highlights versus the yellow ones. I think it very quickly can get very messy, and you get lost in the process of what you can do, and you may not necessarily take as much out of it. Bob.
Well, I thought a lot about these questions some years ago when I wrote Mapping Hypertext. And one of the among the experiment that I did, you know, most of you have copies of it. You know that every double page spread has the key idea in very large print at the top. It has what is better shown visually than described in verbal terms done each time. Maybe I'd be, you know, at some point be very interested in reactions. You know, a half-hour critique of the thing. You know, it was done a long time ago. You know, I'm somewhat detached from the whole thing, but I think it was one alternative way of addressing the issue, all of the issue. I say all of the issues that have been raised around formatting and summarizing. Even the table of contents. I did a whole experiment with the table of contents such that you can see a list of all the key ideas at the very beginning and so forth. So I'd be interested if the group was interested in a critique of it at some point. Probably not today because I'm going to have to leave pretty soon.
And it would warrant more than one single talk. That's a great idea, fascinating exercise too. Interesting.
How can we
Yeah,
build on?
definitely.
You know, I'm all on building on what we've been doing, what people have done in the past. As you know, I like to build on Otter. can
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
move from Otter to, you know, the version that I tried to do some years ago?
Yeah, that specific point about building, I would be fascinated to try to take that perspective, Bob, on mapping hypertext and go through it. Obviously, I don't have my copy here in the hotel, but yeah, like one of the things that I think about highlighting is that a lot of the time when I see other people's highlights, I don't have a particularly clear sense of what people mean and what kinds of shades of meaning they're throwing the document into, how they're shifting it as a consequence of doing that highlighting. And so one of the things that I like is annotation of some kind, people being able to actually sort of comment or write marginal notes and things like that. Obviously that can be very distracting if it's done in a way that sort of overrides the canonical or cardinal meaning of the text. And so digital by default is something that allows for more flexibility in that regard, which means that people can layer those things on top of each other. And I've told you about it before, but it's something that I really enjoyed the premise of, even if I didn't succeed in getting a lot of interesting stuff out of it yet, but you know, there's still time, is the photo annotator project that I produced, where, you know, I have a slideshow of photos and you can collect audio kind of recollections and reflections from multiple sources that live alongside it. And so I think it would be interesting for a book to have, maybe you read a book and then have audio annotations where you sort of pause and talk about what it is you think at any given moment. And in some regard, you know, YouTube is becoming this with reaction videos. Sometimes people will watch the entirety of a video, play pause, and react to it in real time. And that's an interesting sort of template or model to be able to follow or pursue. Think about what kinds of functions we might get out of being able to interpose, not just highlighting sort of the specification of this as being more important than that, but some modality where people are able to input some of their own stuff. And yeah, like I said in the chat, I haven't tried using Hypothesis myself in that regard, but it would be perhaps an interesting way of being able to layer commentary on top on top of things, making meta text as well as hypertext.
Yes, I think if you have just the highlight, you miss a lot of context. One might highlight because it's true, because it's wrong, because they have a crazy idea that nobody else might think about. So just the highlight without annotation might create frustration, but that's also why the collaborative aspect might be interesting, because it surfaces what more than one person. Because if it's just one person, indeed, as Jim was saying, maybe you have a completely different annotations or highlighting style than everybody else. I took the mic though also to do a very brief demo of some of the stuff that was hopefully fixed since the event.
Since you're going to do that, can I just mention something really quick about what Brandel said? So we can proper focus on what you're saying. Is that okay? Because you're going to do a demo now, right?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, just really quickly. One of the major things I noticed as a student trying to do my PhD with these reference managers is you cannot search the text of a PDF, only your own highlights. So that is, of course, one of the functions we highlight. We want to be able to search on that first. Second point, see how quick I am, Fabian? Second point, annotations as citations, meaning if you annotate something, you should be able to see that as a separate item. In other words, an academic document is actually an annotation on the previous document it cites. So that's why addressing and citation is so important in our world. All done. Please, Fabian, I've been looking forward to this.
So let me know, please, if you can see my screen.
Yes.
And you can see the viewer perspective.
Yes.
Okay, so I really won't be able to see, of course, anything, just hear you. It's the same foundations or code as you've seen in the past, but as hopefully you can see, I deleted 80% of it, maybe, or hidden away. And the first thing was to also, it adjusted the height based on me sitting and not standing up. But yeah, most of the things are gone. With little things like this still left to change the 3D objects. So that's one example I can put away. I can still pinch to get my keyboard there that I extended so that I can still type the command there, but then I can add them here. I think I can. So that's Vince who showed me this before. I didn't think about it, but I can reorganize the keyboard. Can try, yeah. So that my enter key is here, and now I have another object I can move around. One of the things I showed also before was tapping here to change the space, but not today apparently, and to make it now as a shortcut. So if I drag and drop the command here, okay, not today also, but this morning I could grab and basically have this command always available to be more efficient. And for the sequential aspect that Bob mentioned before, so again, this was a list of 20 comments before, and now I can have comments that bring other ones. So the goal to be, let's say, as sequential as possible. You have only 4 or 5 comments at the beginning, and then as you go through, let's say, the instruction or the story, let's say, then you will have maybe 1 comment showing, the other hidden away. But yes, the ability to hide most of it and show only in the right order. And things on accessibility, because that was also mentioned during the talk. So my dominant hand and my secondary hand, let's say, can be switched. And, but this now works, okay. So I can have those. Maybe I can try this again.
I love the little block and the utility belt aspect of it.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, Fabienne, this is phenomenal work, and obviously the demo is horrible because we're watching it on VR. Is it easy, maybe in the future, to set up a static camera that shows what you're doing and share the static camera with us?
Yes, it would be.
Hmm.
It would be because initially it was networked. So basically, you could also just join without me sharing my screen, and you would see the things being done live. I removed it because there was noise. People would see like a cylinder if two persons tried the demo at once, and in the end, that prevented from properly seeing everything.
Just a question to Bob real quick. Bob, now that you've been a little bit in VR, what you saw here that Fabienne did you get a better appreciation that he obviously saw it rock solid, even though we didn't?
Yes, of course, there's improvements from the last time.
Well, I just mean that now that you've been in VR a little bit, you do feel at least that the world you see in VR is not kind of wavy, floaty, but it is completely solid, right? So that you can see potential things happening there, right?
Oh, yes, sure. Yeah,
Okay.
that's possible. Sure.
Right. Yeah, I just think it's amazing what you're building, Fabian. I just want to make sure it was seen properly. Oh, this light in here is awful. I can't concentrate.
A quick, sorry, a little comment on why also that changes, because I gave a demo to kids yesterday from 3 years old to 7 or 8 years old, I think. And it was funny because first it was not a random demo, but something I've done. They all tried to jump on how to grab the text because it was a little bit too high. That's also why I adjusted it. But that made me think that this kind of system where text or code change the environment, being either visually or music or however you want, in terms of either numeracy or literacy, or as a way to play by having agency, because the impact is immediate. Like you do something and it's basically like magic. In terms of pedagogy, is pretty interesting. Like the little turtle moving around, is that kind of thing. So right now I don't have I made a kind of cuter, I hope, environment so that everybody feels comfortable in it. But I think the prompt of doing the demo at the symposium and showing to people who never seen VR before, and the discussion accessibility make it more, it's exciting for me for a broader audience, even if that wasn't I was the only initial target, let's say.
Love it. A few comments, if I may, one directly pertaining to that, and then the others, the link that I threw in there. I updated my Oculus, and first off had the horrible, I felt like Bob here trying to I felt completely lost trying to type in, hand one finger at a time to try and type in the URL to try out the VR demos. And then of course they would like auto suggest or try and autocomplete, and it was just a nightmare, which I so want to have a better version of a keyboard in VR. And I'm sure there's probably a way to sync it to my keyboard, but I don't know about any of that. Also, I couldn't get any of the demos to actually launch. Some of them I know that, like, I believe with Brandel's, the drop zone, I'm sure that there's an aspect of that where it's syncing, my browser and the Oculus and the browser and the desktop are somehow the same instance, but I couldn't figure that part out. And then I couldn't get the other ones to I saw Bob Horn's like map that, could be twisted around, but I couldn't get the other ones to launch. So I'd love to get I don't know, even just a GitHub README of like, do this, then do this, then do this. If this fails, do this, right? And then on a separate note, the link that I just threw in there, I think is such an interesting angle and it would be something I would be interested in making, especially with, I mean, this is read, I feel like in line, channeling the spirit of Adam Warren. If you go to the site, or I can share my screen, you see this kind of arbitrary prompt of, if you knew me, you would love me. And then you have all of these terms, but you can move the terms up and down to sort of what you kind of work out in a game-like fashion, how you think this interface works. And so one assumes that you are first off judging the person under the column I am by stack ranking these descriptors, and then you move on through this sentence in a kind of a weird Mad Lib way. But saying all that is be like, I think that would be such an interesting experiment for the material and future of text to say, like, what follows is not only what I want to read about and the things I want to read about, but like, I'm interested in a compressed version, or I'm interested in a meandering version, or, you know, a speculative version, and these different sort of attributes that you normally don't see in an appendix, as a way to result in a very simple place to start with, you know, a paragraph. But that leads to perhaps more that person said, or different paragraphs that are similar, and you can kind of, you know, choose your own adventure. Anyway, if anybody's interested in building that, I'm tempted to. Well, I've already started doing a little bit in Svelte along these lines.
Mark, can I ask a practical question? Is that okay if I go ahead of you? Thank you. The question is to Brandel, because the issue that Alan had with not being able to view the demos is of course annoying, and it's also annoying that we're not all in VR watching Fabian's demo. I'm in Norway, that's my excuse. But this new meta thing coming up on soon, 17th, I think you wrote. What do you know about it? Is it something we should wait and splurge on, or should we try to be Quest 2 for a while? Because I have a feeling waiting for all of us till January for the Apple one, or whenever it actually will be released rather than announced, is probably not a good investment in our experience, so to speak. We need to be ahead of the pack, and these practical issues made me ask. So, what advice have you got, Brandel, for how we should VR ourselves?
Well, you know, in terms of having access to hardware, the best one is the one you can get. That said, so it's very valuable to be able to do stuff with the Quest 2 or even a Quest 1 at this point. That said, it does seem, you know, very likely that the Quest Pro will be released on the 11th of October. And that'll be a full color pass-through system, making use of a single monoscopic color camera and reconciling that with a number of external cameras to be able to kind of paint the world. And so it'll be sort of plausibly augmented reality headset. It's going to be expensive. It's going to be substantially more than $800. Which means that it's likely to be somewhere around $1,000 to $1,200. Unfortunately, at this point, that means £1,000 to £1,200 for people in the UK, because they are the same. Yeah, it's going to be good. There's very likely to be a Quest 3 being released around the same time, which would be more of the successor to that lower end price range. And hopefully it'll be somewhere around the $300 to $400 range, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly what it does. It's unlikely to have color pass through. That's likely to be a Quest Pro feature. I have it on pretty good authority that Samsung is going to be releasing an AR VR helmet headset at some point in the nearest future, and it may be worth holding off on that. No, but the biggest thing for me is that I don't have confidence that any company really has a particularly strong view of what to do with any of these things. And so the trick is to come up with to start with a hardware platform that's adequate to be able to make further demands essentially to the software and the hardware, so that it's sort of relevant to some of the questions that the top end hardware and software manufacturers will be sort of having to pursue in the foreseeable future.
And of course, as in this community, we develop WebXR stuff. It doesn't matter which one, right?
It doesn't matter which one insofar as they all run WebXR. Some of them are going to be better than others. So if you have a Quest Pro, hopefully it'll be more powerful than a Quest. You can plug a Quest 2, Quest 1 into a PC, unfortunately at this point not a Mac, and then get the PC to power it, which is pretty cool, but you don't get the benefit of hands. So there are trade-offs in terms of that prototyping platforms, but it is a lot more powerful. Use a desktop PC for your VR, and you get the whole kit and caboodle in terms of the capabilities there. Yeah.
Oh, you can pair a Bluetooth keyboard.
Mhm.
Okay.
And even have it overlaid. So when you see a keyboard in VR, it is your physical keyboard.
Yeah, it's
I think
brilliant.
I did that once.
Not in
I was
WebXR.
how good it. What's that?
In WebXR, you don't have the path through.
Oh.
So you see in the OS, but not in the experience itself. But to be fair, so the Bluetooth keyboard, to quickly go on this, definitely works. It's definitely so much more better than anything like clicking and everything, except if you have a relevant context for it. It's also not perfect. It's like a millimeter or two off. And if you're not familiar already with the keyboard you have, if you actually look, I find it not that helpful. So to locate where it is, if you're not, let's say, used to touch typing or positioning it blind, it's also not magic, but it's definitely worth plenty of interesting things to play with it. And just the demo I was showing is keyboard compatible, so that you don't have to pinch. If you do have
good. Okay.
keyboard, you actually type proper either sentence or code snippets.
Yeah, I'm unfortunately running out of time, but Mark, that was a practical question that went on forever. I'm really, really sorry.
It's all right. I mean, I was just quickly going to interject that I don't think it's the case that reference managers can't summarize annotations, and I think they can now. And I put in the sidebar, I think the problem actually is not sort of dumb developers. It's actually that PDF's pretty messy inside. You can put any old crap inside the wrapper, and different systems basically put things they call annotations in there, and the poor benighted developer has to fish around in the soup for what we as a user know to be the annotations. In other words, it's a little bit more complicated. And the other thing is, it may be that the feature doesn't exist across all annotation resource managers because for one or two reasons. Some people don't read. Some people use reference managers to store references, but they don't read their PDFs there. They don't. That's not what they keep their reference notes.
Yeah, no, I'm just stressing because I have to go in 3 minutes, but that is an important discussion, especially between you and me, Mark. Fabian, anything else for the time we have together? I'll leave the meeting room open, obviously, but
I'm going to go.
But I'll have to go too, so it's going to take me less than a minute.
Oh,
Just
no.
to say, it was great at the symposium to do face-to-face demo, but now the symposium is not there, and we might have, let's say, 6 months before we see each other, but I still want to do demo. So I'm working specifically on a remote demo. I'll make, Alan, if it's useful for you, like say a 3-minute video on how to set up WebXR, how to go from a link on the desktop to having it in the headset. And then eventually I have a couple of demos planned with others on the experience I've shown. But then if some of you also want to try it, and I can be there for a bit of hand holding and get your feedback, I'll be up for it. I'm slowly gearing up to do more of that.
I would really like it, Fabian, if you did that, but also if you wrote it down so we can put it in our book. Because even though this technical advice will only be relevant for a few months, it'll probably change with new headsets. It is an indication of the state of the art today, which will have significance in the future when people want to compare. Right?
Put it right next to like how you used to crank a car to get it started.
Or how to hold your pen. That's an article from medieval times. Indeed. Yeah, no, I mean, this is also partly why Mark is doing the article on image maps, because it's a useful concept, but the way it's done now is pretty hokey. So yeah, no, that's good. Should we, or let's see. I'm just wondering, maybe, Jim, if we can plan that you and Bob are together on Friday, maybe, or Monday, so that we can maybe try to, all of us, be in headsets for a Fabian walkthrough.
No, no, that's why I'm saying, well, I don't want to do this because I'm not ready to scale. One of you failing at a time is more than enough to keep me busy, not because we will fail, but because we're still ironing out all the kinks. You just saw the demo I showed you. The pinch as a bookmark did not work. It worked just hours ago. I changed something. I started an issue, but I'm not ready for that. I'd love to, but not yet.
All right, well, that's fine, but let's, yeah, we gotta do more time in VR, but did we agree that our key thing now is working on making our quote unquote content more useful to people in VR and out of VR, but also how that then works with the notion of personal knowledge management, right? Is that what we're looking at? It seems quite simple.
I think the personal knowledge management portion is an entirely different conversation that is worth, like, I think more progress could be made by focusing on one of them, how to make the content more useful, and that will naturally flow into that second one. But that second one, oh my goodness, that can go in so many different directions. I mean, I agree that it's a goal, but I think it's a cascading goal from the first.
I see you have to go, Brandel. Yeah, good luck. I will,
Thank you.
I'll talk to you later. I gotta go in a minute too. Alan, I agree with you on a pragmatic level, but on a design level, I think because of what you said, feeds into is kind of important. So if we provide a way to view this, we should at the same time think about, so what? Other than the experience of watching it live, so what? How does it fit into the person's digital life? That's why I'm thinking, you know, whether it's a citation, whether it's an annotation, whether it's a link, whether it's a highlight, whether it's tearing something up, what is the kind of knowledge management we'd like it to go into? What kind of an object, situation, or relationship would we like to be moving about?
If I were the product manager of this, one of the exercises I'd have us run through is, and I think Bob would agree with this too, is like, we need to get some hypothesis of the kinds of users, right? Because there's only one kind of user in that case that happens to rely on or use PKMs. There are other kinds of users that are just very minimally interested in what is future of text? What even does this mean, right? There and I think that
Okay,
that's
I'm going to
always been
interrupt. I have to go. I'm going to interrupt you because I agree with you.
okay.
But my proposal is maybe on Friday we start having a session where you are the product manager for this, and you go through exactly that, because having a recorded discussion on who we expect to read our work is probably very, very useful. Does everyone feel that makes sense?
Yes, and just before you go, everything I've shown rely on my PKM. So it's not disconnected from the small demos I've shown. Everything is pulled in and out and back in a wiki. It's not necessarily what everybody uses, but at least as one example of, for me, it's completely coherent.
That's
That's
perfect.
good to know.
That's perfect. And Alan, are you okay with that?
Yes, I should be available on Friday. I'll have to check because I do have two friends in town. I'll have to see if anything's overlapping there, but it should be fine.
Fantastic. Okay, gotta go. Don't want to be late for the doctor. Thank you, guys. I'll keep the meeting going. Are you going to be here for another couple of minutes or not?
I'm gonna
I'm gonna head out. Yeah.
Cutting off. Bye. See you on Friday.